reintroduce the city's general plan update consultants. Interior Harnish, we have Jim Harnish, the project director on my right, and Michael Gibbons, the project manager. Their subcontracted firms there are listed. They're not here today, but they're listed. They will facilitate tonight's land use alternative discussion by reviewing the land use alternatives and receiving input from the community and the commission. Their goal is to help deliver a preferred land use alternative that tries to capture the community's input and direction. At the end of their presentation this evening, staff recommends that the Plan Commission conduct a public hearing soliciting comments on the different land use alternatives. Staff also recommends that the Plan Commission identify and recommend one preferred land use alternative. It can be a hybrid or a mix of any of those. So at this point, let me turn it over to the folks at Infill Harnish.
Well, good evening, Commission. It's a pleasure to be here. Again, my name is Michael Gibbons. I am a project manager for Infill Harnish and the project manager for this project. With me this evening is Jim Harnish, the principal and owner of Infill Harnish, and we are very excited to be a part of this process. As Miguel mentioned, tonight we are going over the alternatives. We are in that current phase, if you remember that slide, of the general plan update, which is about halfway through. And as Miguel mentioned, this is a culmination of all of the efforts that we've been performing to date. So you're probably wondering, what are land use alternatives? The best way that I like to describe land use alternatives is it's almost a what-if scenario and us analyzing those what-if scenarios. So what would happen if we developed this part of the city? Or what if we prioritized commercial over housing? And it's really an iterative process of producing ultimately, what our goal is producing a new general plan land use map through this process. Now, every general plan has a land use map. The general plan land use map is important for a multitude of reasons. First of all, it guides the overall and general layout of your jurisdiction. So every city and county has to have a general plan. A land use map coincides with that. The general plan guides the general layout of the city by really dividing the city up into what we call designations or different categories. And those different designations and categories specify different types of allowed land uses, the intensity and the density of those land uses. And really the intent here is to produce a new map, and that new map then allows us to run different types of analyses, geospatial analyses, so we can look at transportation, infrastructure, safety, land use, and all around just allows us to have a better idea and plan more strategically our communities. So our approach for this phase has been multifaceted. First, it started with the creation of what we call alternatives. Think of those as just different types of land use scenarios. We've developed really 3 scenarios, all out of direct input from the public via workshops, open houses, in public hearings and study sessions like this evening, as well as looking at the adopted vision statement and guiding principles that the council adopted about 2 years ago at this point. After we developed these land use scenarios, we then analyzed them. We looked at what would be the capacity if we were to prioritize housing here or build commercial here. And then we looked at the pros and cons of those. We documented all of our results and all of our findings in what we call a land use alternative summary report, which was a part of the staff report, which documents our findings. And in that summary report is really what we're going to be discussing tonight. The summary report is a point of comparison. What it allows us to do, again, is it allows us to look at the pros and cons and the trade-offs of these various scenarios that we've developed and built out. And that's what really this is. This is a summary report that is summarizing a theoretical build-out, if you will. And the goal is to provide enough information to the general public, to the elected and appointed, so that you can select and make a recommendation on what you feel would be a preferred alternative for the general plan update. City Council ultimately will select the preferred alternative. So as the Planning Commission is the advisory body, you will be forwarding a recommendation and your comments to the council for consideration. The selected alternative will then be the basis for the new general plan land use map. From there, after we have that map, then we can actually start running a lot of these analyses and reports. So we can start looking at your evacuation analysis reports. We can look at what is the impact potentially on water or how many on hazards. And really that would be documented in what we call an environmental impact report. Every project has to, at least this size, has to produce something similar to this report for environmental compliance. But this is where we really get to see what are the potential environmental impacts to this preferred land use alternative. So I had mentioned that we had developed these land use scenarios with public input, and here are really the key topics and the concepts that were our direction and our focus while we were developing these alternatives and going through the public participation process. So downtown, revitalization of the downtown, housing, improving housing, creating additional opportunities for employment, investing in more multimodal transportation and infrastructure, and then increasing and encouraging park and recreation land uses. For this phase and for this process, we developed a total of 3 alternatives. As I'd mentioned, this is a summary report that is a point of comparison. And so one of our alternatives is really a no change comparison. And it would be what is the baseline if we were to today not change your general plan and what we could reasonably expect in the next 20 to 25 years. The other alternative takes a different approach, and it is an approach of what if we focused on infill development? And then we have an alternative that looks at expansion. So what if we looked at maybe acquiring or designating parcels outside of the current city limits or sphere of influence? To help guide this process and make it palpable and more understandable, we honed in on what we call focus areas. And these are focus areas that we have identified through public input and consultation with city staff and the Planning Commission earlier on last year. These are areas that we've identified that we feel are most likely to change or have the opportunity to change. Again, this helps us narrow our focus. As part of this general plan update is not assumed that every parcel in the city is going to change a different designation. So what these focus areas allow us to do and allows the general public to do is to take a look at this land use map and see where we're actually proposing potential changes. We've identified a total of 8 focus areas that run all through each of these 3 alternatives, and as I go through these alternatives next, you'll see them identified in the map. But as mentioned, there are 8, and here is a map that is showing them. We have the Gallo West focus area, the Winton exit focus area, Peach and Main, downtown, the North Downtown, the Hammett exit area, Kirtner Canal, and then what we're calling the 99 and Sultana focus area. So now I'd like to just walk us through each of these alternatives, each of these scenarios. I'll go through this fairly quickly. We have, in the summary report, it is thoroughly documented, the results of all of these alternatives. But alternative 1, again, this is our baseline. So imagine this is a no change scenario or a no change alternative in which we updated the general plan elements but didn't touch the land use or the general plan map. And really what that does is that represents what the city might look like or what the build-out capacity might be. Build-out capacity meaning what might jobs be, what are the number of housing units, potential population, if we were to change nothing and move forward until 2040. So we're just projecting. Again, in this alternative, we don't propose any changes to the land use designations in your general plan. We're not modifying the city limits, nor are we proposing any modification of your sphere of influence. And this is really an important alternative for that point of comparison so that we can see what these other alternatives might affect and the different land use strategies that we incorporate in the alternatives, how might those affect the city moving forward. So here is a map of what the no change scenario would look like. And really, this is the existing general plan map. We've modified it slightly here to identify some areas that, some properties that are within your housing element, which was your, I believe it's your 2024 to 2032 housing element. And again, no change. So we can see where our focus areas are. You can see that there's this blue line, that's your sphere of influence. And then there is hard to see here, but there is a black dashed line, which would be the city limits. So some of these focus areas are outside, as you may notice, outside of the sphere of influence and city limits. But for our purposes, this was an identified area that the city was interested in seeing what might happen if development were to take place here. Alternative 2 is our first change alternative that we analyzed. And this is an infill-oriented scenario or land use alternative, in which what we do is we focus on the existing vacant and underutilized land within the city. We take advantage of that. And in doing so, we are preserving ag. So in this alternative, we're not proposing any ag conversion or the redesignation of any ag properties surrounding the city, within the city. Within this alternative as well, we are proposing a new mixed-use designation specifically for the downtown. This was something that the Planning Commission had brought up multiple times, as well as the City Council, wanting to see some density and some redevelopment and intensity in the downtown area. And then what we also did is we increased really the capacity or the development intensity allowed for your existing general plan land use designation. So those being your residential or your commercial, industrial. And really the results are this. When we ran this infill alternative, we saw a moderate population growth. There was a fairly substantial growth in multifamily housing, about 94% increase in multifamily housing, about a 16% increase in single-family housing, and then a significant increase in the potential jobs that the city could reasonably facilitate within its limits. And here is what that map looks like. One area that I'll point at that I think looks the most different here is the downtown, is where we have that new mixed-use designation where we're proposing. Alternative 3 takes a different land use approach that we analyze, and this is more of an expansion. What if we not necessarily focused on infill and increasing densities, but what if we looked out at expanding city limits or expanding properties that are outside or inside the sphere of influence, but outside the city limits? And so in this expansion alternative, what we looked at is potentially what it would look like if we annexed key areas outside on the urban fringe and in the city limits. This alternative does include and does analyze what would happen if we potentially converted some existing ag or open space properties within and outside the city limits. We also took a different approach as opposed to creating a new mixed-use zone for your downtown. Instead, what we did is we just increased the density or the intensity that the downtown could potentially facilitate. Really, the difference with this expansion or with this alternative here is that because we are looking at the potential of looking at properties that are outside the city limits, this expansion alternative would require some additional infrastructure just to put services and utilities out to those properties that currently don't have it or aren't provided by the city. And our results, very just briefly, is this alternative facilitated the highest capacity for both population and housing growth. Believe it or not, it's around 175% increase in your existing multifamily housing and 108% increase in your single-family housing. And then again, it had a significant increase in the number of jobs. Both of these scenarios all around have a surplus or an increase in these metrics. And here is a map of this alternative. Points that I will, or changes that I will point out here is different from the other alternatives. There is this regional commercial designation that was applied kind of above that 99 and Sultana interchange. There's also a proposed new designation for the Gallo West area in which it would require a specific plan in order to be developed as a proposal. And we can also see some of the changes in the downtown core, not showing that new mixed use, but rather the existing downtown commercial designation that you have. As Miguel mentioned, a really important point of this project is community engagement. These plans and these general plans really mean nothing unless the public has the support and is providing a voice for their direction and their preference. And that's been something that's been ingrained into this project since day one. And so throughout this process, we've held community engagement events. Our most recent community engagement event was last year, in October of last year. We had an open house right in this room. I see some familiar faces who attended that open house, so good to see you all. And we had a total of about 30 attendees, and we presented really the findings and a very similar presentation that I gave you this evening, an overview of these alternatives. What that allowed us to do, though, was to really solicit feedback directly from the community. And in your staff report, we have a summary of the feedback that we received, both at the actual open house itself and post open house. We had a survey open. We were collecting feedback for, actually, I think it almost was a month and a half that we had. We were soliciting active feedback on the project. And our main takeaways from this open house were this. Overall, there is a support for growth. There is this mindset from what we heard is we need change, is one quote that I heard. Overall, when we looked at the results, there was a general preference from forms that we received and just general conversations that alternative 2 seemed generally the preference of the public. It seemed like it allowed for growth, but not beyond what people felt was reasonable, at least kind of what was articulated to me. There was also a lot of support for this new mixed-use designation. However, what we heard from the community was, why stop at the downtown? There are other places in this community that could also benefit from a more flexible, more intense designation that allowed both residential and commercial besides just the downtown core. There was also a call for increased pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure. I spoke to a group that had some fairly innovative ideas on public infrastructure and wanting to see improvements for public transit. And there was also a call to balance growth with the preservation of our resources. You know, we had mentioned water. We had fires is a real concern in communities these days. And so balancing our desire for, yes, population growth, a better economy, housing, also understanding that that might come with some repercussions on areas that we're developing or various hazards that might come with growth. So that was a very quick overview. Tonight is really supposed to be a study session, so to ask us questions, and then that will really transition into a public hearing in which we will solicit a recommendation from the Planning Commission. But at this point, I know this is a confusing topic, so I would like to hand it back to Miguel to facilitate questions from the Commission, or if you have any clarifications that you would like to have from the team.
Yeah, if the commission has any questions of staff, that would be the appropriate time to do that. And then after that, we can open up the public hearing, study session.
Any questions?
I have a question. As I look at the alternative 3, the expansion, this, for the Gallo West, this potential specific plan, what exactly does that mean?
A specific plan is it's another level of review. A specific plan is I'm thinking about a different term to make it easy to understand. It's kind of like a mini general plan. It's kind of like we have this general plan, but now we're going to focus only on this specific area. And then they're going to focus on many of the similar things, infrastructure. They're going to focus on housing and parks. And one of the things that benefits with a specific plan is you have the opportunity to develop specific design guidelines and financing mechanisms like for infrastructure, for streets, sewer, water lines, all these things will be identified. And any development that would take place in the specific plan would have to conform to that. So you have an ability with a specific plan to kind of dictate a little bit further how development in that area should look and when and how it should develop. Otherwise, if you have an area that has multiple property owners, they develop at different times, and it's very disjointed. With a specific plan, you're able to coordinate all that development, and everyone kind of agrees to develop in accordance with that specific plan. I hope that makes sense.
Well, it does, but then it kind of brings me to another question. With that specific plan, is that something that it looks like we're gonna look at things individually and the projects but is it something to where, I just don't understand, are they gonna be subject to different rules in that than a set zoned area where it's only gonna be single family dwellings or multifamily or commercial or that?
The specific plan allows that flexibility. It can say, you know what, we want to develop this area with a certain theme. So it does allow more certainty of how that area will develop. But it serves multiple purposes. One of the good things about a specific plan is you're able to do some comprehensive infrastructure planning, for example. Like everyone agrees this is how we're going to provide water out here. Here's where the storm drain basin is. Otherwise, you get piecemeal developments like, we don't know where the storm drain basin is going to be located. But if you identify that all up front, it makes development of that whole area much more easy. Everyone has a general concept of how that will develop. Like, remember, we're going to put the park over here, the school over here, and then it's like there's certainty as to what an area will look like.
I have a question, and just to piggyback off of Renee there. Is there a vision for that Gallo West? And how did we come up with the conclusion of a specific or potential specific plan for that? Was there a vision that attaches to designating that?
Yes and no. It's a staff recommendation. Staff said, you know what, when this area develops, because right now it's in farming, it gives us an opportunity really we don't have a specific vision in mind that says, this needs to be developed like all with single-family homes. It's kind of, let's give the city an opportunity to decide how this area should develop. And one way to do that is a specific plan. There's no specific, it's all going to be business, or it's all going to be commercial. It might be a mix, but it gives us another planning tool on how that area can be developed. So we do not have a specific vision in mind, other than saying this is a good tool to use to facilitate development out there.
So, sorry, follow up again. Why don't we use that designation on all then if we have more control?
That's a great question. Usually what happens is in other parts of town, you have multiple property owners and not everyone agrees. It's like, oh, you know what? And then when you have one common property owner, when you start with one ownership, you can kind of mandate that all the properties with that ownership have to follow. When you have other areas around town that are comprised of different ownership, it'll be hard to solidify what that specific plan area how it will be developed or what land uses will be there. Someone said, well, I want a shopping center on my property. Well, you're going to get a park site, and you get into disagreements there. But it's possible. The other thing too is, I'll just mention, is that in other cities, when you have a diverse area, then the city takes the lead and develops a specific plan, and everyone that wants to develop has to kind of participate in funding when they develop. But when you have like the Gallo property, when you have a specific plan that's one ownership, then that gives the opportunity for the property owner to kind of say, hey, I have full control of this property, this is how I would like to develop, and so it gives them an opportunity to kind of share what their vision is in developing that area.
Another question that I have, when we look at the sphere of influence of a community is